West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The owner of the Garden of Evil wants to assure you that the one thing he has never done in his Garden of Evil is discuss Supreme Court opinions with Clarence Thomas, who is his best friend. Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas have not used the term best friend to describe one another, but how could Clarence Thomas ever have a better friend? Texas billionaire Harlan Crow, who calls his backyard the Garden of Evil because it is populated with statues of some of the most evil men in history, has allowed Clarence Thomas to live more of the life of a billionaire than any of us ever will. The trips on the private jets, the trips on the yacht. And Harlan Crow has pumped money directly into the joint income of Clarence Thomas and his wife. Harlan Crow contributed more than enough money to fully fund Virginia Thomas's salary at one of the places she once worked. And Harlan Crow allows Clarence Thomas's mother to live rent-free in a house that Harlan Crow bought from Clarence Thomas, putting some of the purchase price of that house directly into Clarence Thomas's pocket. Harlan Crow then fixed up the house, and now Clarence Thomas's mother is living at no expense at all to Clarence Thomas, all thanks to the best friend a Supreme Court justice could ever have, as long as that justice does not mind being exposed as the most corrupt Supreme Court justice the court has ever had. If there has been a more corrupt Supreme Court justice than Clarence Thomas, then that corruption has remained secret. No such corruption has ever been made public. In an interview with The Atlantic, published today, Harlan Crow expresses astonishment that anyone could ever be concerned about the integrity of Clarence Thomas. I have never, nor would I ever, think about talking about matters that relate to the judiciary with Justice Clarence Thomas, Crow said. He told The Atlantic they talk about things like the weather and sports, and then decided to amend that after the interview in an email saying, quote, "It is not realistic for two people to be friends and not talk about their jobs from time to time. Thomas has spoken to him of his fondness for his clerks or about bumping into Justice Stephen Breyer at Target." But Crow wrote that it would be wrong for him to talk about court cases. From my point of view, that is off limits. He and I don't go there. And so if you're comfortable taking Texas billionaire Harlan Crow's word for it, there's nothing to be worried about. But it is hard to be comfortable with anything that Harlan Crow says, including, quote, "The kids used to be scared of them." That's what he said about the statues in his Garden of Evil. which include Lenin and Stalin and other dictators from around the world, dead dictators. What manner of man puts statues of evildoers in his garden and then enjoys them? What kind of father leaves them there knowing that his kids are scared by them? Wandering around the Garden of Evil, Harlan Crow told his Atlantic interviewer, quote, "I'm not looking to be odd." Well, he has failed miserably. The Atlantic makes the mistake of printing the line, "He feels he has acted with the purest and most honorable intentions." No one at the Atlantic knows what Harlan Crow feels. But this is exactly the kind of misconception that access journalism always produces. You will see that kind of reporting in the New York Times and everywhere that access journalism is practiced. The journalistically correct way to deliver that line would be to say, he claims he has acted with the purest and most honorable intentions. That leaves open the possibility that he did act with the purest and most honorable intentions, and it leaves open the possibility that he didn't. But the Atlantic has decided to remove your option as a reader and present to you as a fact that the Atlantic knows what Harlan Crow feels. The more you know about him, the more impossible it is to know what he feels. What would you feel holding Hitler's teapot in your hand? Could you do it? If you were in a room and were told that was Hitler's teapot, would you touch it? Would you want to? Would your fingers be drawn to the handle of that teapot that brought comfort to Adolf Hitler while he was exterminating 6 million Jews in his death camps? What would it feel like to touch that handle? If you dared. Harlan Crow knows he owns the teapot. He claims it's important that such things be preserved, but do they need to be preserved in his home? Couldn't he, after paying a billionaire's ransom for Hitler's teapot and pictures painted by Hitler and Hitler's table linens, couldn't Harlan Crow donate them to the appropriate archive of such material? Why own them? Why have them in your home? Why sleep under the same roof with Hitler's possessions, things Hitler touched? Can the Atlantic tell us what Harlan Crow feels when his hand grips Hitler's teapot? Can the Atlantic tell us what Harlan Crow feels when he falls asleep in a house where he knows Hitler's paintings are peacefully residing with him? Harlan Crow decided to take Hitler's paintings out of their normal display position when he was doing a fundraiser for failed presidential candidate Marco Rubio in 2015. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz complained then publicly that Marco Rubio was going into a home with Hitler's paintings for a fundraiser. So only in 2015 did it occur to Harlan Crow that maybe Hitler's paintings shouldn't be on prominent public display in his home. Now the biggest, most prominent painting on display in his home is a portrait of his best friend, Clarence Thomas, which seems hardly controversial at all when the alternative would be having Hitler's paintings hanging there instead. Harlan Crow owns a copy of Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, signed by Adolf Hitler. So when Harlan Crow is holding Hitler's book in his hands, he knows that Hitler himself held this particular copy of this book in his hands. I think I might feel as if my hands were on fire if I were forced to touch that book. How does Harlan Crow feel when he holds Hitler's book signed by Hitler? We don't know. The Atlantic doesn't know. Harlan Crow tells The Atlantic, it's kind of weird to think that if you're a justice on the Supreme Court, you can't have friends. Of course you can have friends if you're on the Supreme Court. They all have friends. That's not the issue, but it is entirely possible that Harlan Crow is not intelligent enough to actually see what the real issue is. Harlan Crow was not asked if he thinks there's the slightest chance that he would have befriended Clarence Thomas if Clarence Thomas were not a Supreme Court justice. Harlan Crow went out of his way to meet Clarence Thomas by giving him a ride on his private jet in the 4th year of Clarence Thomas's service on the Supreme Court. He says they have discovered we share a love of Motown. Harlan Crow complains to The Atlantic, if I go out and help an old lady across the street this afternoon, there'll be something written about my diabolical purpose and evil intent. Has he ever helped an old lady across the street? Would he help her across the street if she were not a Supreme Court justice? Despite his attempts to appear normal and sound normal, Harlan Crow is indeed somewhere far beyond odd. About the Hitler paintings and Hitler possessions in his home, Harlan Crow told The Atlantic, the idea that I might offend somebody, particularly somebody I care about, one of my friends, with this stuff, that hurts. I would never want to do that. Harlan Crow was not asked if he has any Jewish friends. Did he think Debbie Wasserman Schultz was kidding when she publicly expressed her offense that Harlan Crow gave Hitler's paintings and his teapot a happy home? Harlan Crow was born in Texas in 1947. He was educated in the Deep South at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. How did he feel about that? The Atlantic doesn't know, and The Atlantic didn't ask. He went to college in Atlanta while Martin Luther King was preaching to his Atlanta congregation across town. Martin Luther King Jr. was the most famous person living in Atlanta when Harlan Crow went to college there. What did Harlan Crow think about Martin Luther King? The Atlantic did not ask. One of Harlan Crow's neighbors is Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. Here is Jerry Jones in Little Rock, Arkansas, when President Eisenhower used the American military to force the integration of a public high school there. Jerry Jones was among the protesters. Jerry Jones was there to protest integration and cheer on and try to maintain segregation. What was Harlan Crow doing that day? What was he feeling as the whole country watched that horrible display of racism in Little Rock, Arkansas that day? The whole country was watching. Has Harlan Crow ever talked to his neighbor Jerry Jones about that day? There are no segregationists in Harlan Crow's Garden of Evil. There are no American slave owners in Harlan Crow's Garden of Evil. Harlan Crow claims to abhor Donald Trump, but there is no Trump statue in the Garden of Evil.
It is Tuesday, the 23rd of May of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our hostess, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has. And it always will. Okay. Got all the taglines out of the way. How are you doing on this fine Tuesday? Sunny day here, a little bit cooler, and we'll get into the weather later on. But we like it because the hellish hot days are still to be expected. Fortunately, we did get quite a bit of rain, but I have noticed that as the humidity level has dropped, I'm starting to get dry spots in the lawn. And I know we're not supposed to have a lawn, but it was there before, we moved here. And, it doesn't take much to maintain it. But I'm just saying the shallower parts of where there's not so much soil, because most of it is webbed by the conifer trees that are around here, and we are in a river plain, so a lot of the substrata is full of gravel from the river. So a lot of times there's not a whole lot of dirt before you get to the roots. So when things get dried out, the sponginess of that soil, well, it starts to desiccate and become much harder, and then you get the dry spots. So we mitigate that with paint? No, I like wildflowers myself. Tiny little spots of color, filling in the spots, cooling it off. We want cool. I'm telling you, when you live in the heat, you value cool. Okay, enough of that. That was sort of a little tangent that I had no intention of tangentially even approaching, but I did. The drama of this welcome wagon that was rolled out for a diverse family, that when I say diverse in terms of culture, gender identity, color, race, culture, that kind of stuff. Apparently they were too identifiable, and they became identifiable because, well, they were flying the enemy flag. And what is the enemy flag? I guess a rainbow. Flying a rainbow flag. And so a guy came up, and the guy's actually well known. He's shown up at a few other gatherings, shall we say, to intimidate and dictate and run people out that they don't want here because this is a conservative town. Really? Is it? Is it really? Actually, what I found out is that it's a lot more liberal, but the liberals learned real quick not to raise their heads up because they're going to be a target. Not like moi. No. Yeah, I'll put a target on my back, on my front. Come at me. I was raised in this stuff. Yeah, you guys know. First cross that was ever burned on our lawn was when we moved to Southern California to the San Gabriel Valley, a bit before it became Southeast Asian Mecca. And rightfully so. Good thing, too. But, yeah, we had the John Birchers in Diamond Bar. And then we had on the other side of us the Nazis and the White Citizens Council. They shared the same office. Yeah, the White Citizens Council was like kind of like a West Coast version of the Klan. So you had the Nazis and our version of the Klan in Hacienda Heights. Birchers on the right side, and the Nazis and the Klan were on the left. My God. I got to tell you, they're back. So, yeah, the first cross we had burned on our lawn was when my dad, my mom, and the department head and his wife at Cal State Fullerton, that's where my father was teaching at the time, and they started the first ACLU chapter in the San Gabriel Valley. And the San Gabriel Valley Daily Tribune, as it was known then. Now it's just known as the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, but it was the Daily Tribune back in the 60s. Now, I don't know. Maybe this was par for the course, but I always thought of it as conveniently, with air quotes, they conveniently published our address. And then the fun began. Oh, my God. So, yeah, we had a cross burned on our lawn a couple of times, and I was like 10, 11 years old. So when you're a kid, you have no frame of reference. You just think, wow, this is kind of like normal. I mean, it seems abnormal, but normal behavior. So you grow up in that kind of atmosphere, shall we say. And you can either be intimidated by it and cower, or you don't. We never did. I will say that we moved to Orange County, which was a lot quieter. We moved to North Orange County, Yorba Linda, Fullerton, Placentia, Brea, that area. A lot quieter than being right smack dab between the Birchers and the Klan and the Nazis. Shoo, a lot of din going on there. Not just the Pomona, there was a 60 freeway being built at the time, too. So, I'm somewhat used to dealing with know-it-alls who think that they can intimidate and dictate and tell people who is the boss. Because we know who is the boss. And it's not the Nazis. You don't negotiate with them. You tell them what to do. They don't like it. I know. They have all sorts of ways of reprisals. I know. And I don't blame people for, keeping their head down. I don't advertise. I haven't put up a lawn sign on my property. Most people know me by my first name in public, in person, out here. Because the same people that kind of like are a little threatening to Justice, which is my middle name, it's my real name, have no idea that I'm that guy. And that's the way I like it. And when they find out, whoo-wee, I'm just telling you, even at my advanced, decrepit age, people kind of back off. I was told by some really nice people that sometimes I can look mean. Not me, I'm a big teddy bear. I don't look mean. I guess I do. Oh, my gosh. When I went to France with Flora the first time, a lot of people thought I was a Hell's Angel. Like, what? Me, a Hell's Angel? Just because I'm big and I had a goatee? Rather bushy goatee, too, and a lot of bushy hair, and I was kind of buff. So I could see where they'd make the mistake. And I had to, dissuade them of that idea because Hell's Angels ride Harleys. And I've always been partial to Moto Guzzi's, Triumphs, Indians, Nortons, that kind of thing. If I'm going to ride a big bike, it's going to be Moto Guzzi. That's just me. I guess it's the difference between the mods and the rockers. Yeah, I'm a mod. Get out of here. Anyway, apparently I look mean enough even in my own old, decrepit state. Am I that decrepit? Yeah, maybe I am. In comparison. Boy. Anyway, the drama continues. There's a lot of people still defending this fellow, saying, he wasn't going up there to, complain about them. He just wanted to have a conversation. No, you don't have a conversation like that. If you want to have a conversation with people, maybe if you, I don't know. Do you confront them at the coffee shop? I don't know. Anyway, it's quite funny because, you F around and then you find out and now it's everybody else's fault because he was, driven to stand up for what's right. And what is right? Telling people that they have no right to be around here because you don't look like us. And I'm like, good thing. My God. All right. Well, like I keep reminding folks, it's not my first rodeo dealing with gun-toting know-it-alls who, want you to know who is the boss. I will decide what is polite conversation. Yeah, I know. You've got the gun. Probably a whole arsenal of them. All right. We could go on, but we're not, because we did take time to curate a show for you. And I say that in the royal we, by the way, because there's some busy people here at Netroots Radio, and they can't be, coddling me. Anyway, we put together a nice show for you. At least we think so. So why don't we inform you about what that show is? What have we curated for you here in this salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays? Well, Amazon employees plan to walk off the job as tensions rise across the tech sector. Well, Harlan Crow serves high tea from his Hitler teapot while lounging in his Garden of Evil. Nice statuary. Then on the rest of the menu, Amazon employees plan to walk off the job as tensions rise across the tech sector. The Education Department has concluded that book removals are a violation of students' civil rights. Well, it's about goddamn time. And Oregon's governor seeks changes to the legislature's overhaul of the public defender system. Yeah, they're leaving the state. After the break, we move to the chef's table where the Lebanese chief prosecutor summoned the country's central bank chief following an Interpol warrant over corruption charges. And a prominent Australian Indigenous journalist quit television hosting duties in response to racist abuse over his comments during King Charles III's coronation. And what were those comments about? Well, about historic Aboriginal dispossession. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so, and so much more. If you would then look across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us. We have bills to pay and all the other sundry costs, keeping this powerhouse of resistance resisting as the founders originally intended so many years ago. So if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, thus becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it does help us pay those bills, and I'm not kidding. And it is a big help, so thank you for that generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, or those, and thank you, Tom, for doing that and everything else that you do as well. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam, of course. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime, so you can always find them by going to my social media feeds, because the links are just right there. There they are. Follow the show on Twitter, such as it is, at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, Deezer. What's Deezer? Everywhere. Podcasts are everywhere. Get them. Get ours, please. Rate it. I don't know. Do what you do. Listen. Just get them. And there they are. Okay. This first offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Washington Post by Carolyn O'Donovan and Naomi Mix. On Monday, some Amazon workers at the company's Seattle headquarters announced internally, and that was yesterday, by the way, they announced internally their plans to walk off the job. In messages sent out via Slack and email, employee organizers urged their colleagues to walk out on May 31st, 1 week after the company's annual shareholder meeting, in response to frustration over layoffs and the return to office mandate, as well as concerns about Amazon's climate commitments. Morale feels like it's at an all-time low, said a Los Angeles-based Amazon employee who plans to participate and who spoke on condition of anonymity to protect their job. In meetings and one-on-ones with colleagues, There's so much uncertainty and lack of clarity from leadership, the employee said. It's an unsettling time to work at Amazon. The walkout, which organizers hope will draw at least 1,000 Seattle-based participants, is part of a greater wave of anxiety spilling over into agitation among Silicon Valley workers. Wait a second. Silicon Valley's in California. Seattle's not. Anyway, we know what they mean. And the agitation among Silicon Valley workers as hiring freezes follow mass layoffs amid a looming potential recession. At Meta, Facebook, morale has plummeted as top bosses receive big bonuses while the company continues to lay off thousands of people. Well, you got to put that money from the ledger somewhere. And if you've gotten rid of a bunch of, chaff, split it among the bigwigs. Is that how it's supposed to be done? Apparently not. During a round of recent earning calls, tech executives generally painted a rosier financial picture for the companies, but now workers at the notoriously cushy firms are growing more agitated even as their power to make changes wanes with their lack of job security. Layoffs almost always create a sense of betrayal among workers, said Nelson Lichtenstein, a labor historian at the University of California at Santa Barbara, which is why it makes sense that workers are expressing frustration even in the current economic environment. At many of these high-tech firms, there's a certain sense of creating a new world, something better, he said. When you have a particular sense of grievance and a righteousness, you can still have a worker or employee action, even in periods of recession or depression. Sometimes that's transcended by a sense of moral outrage. Google did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Meta declined to comment. Amazon spokeswoman Lisa Lewandowski said, "We respect our employees' rights to express their opinions." Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays is also out of the Washington Post, this time by Hannah Nathanson and Dan Rosenvig-Ziff. In a move that could affect how schools handle book challenges, the federal government has concluded that a Georgia school district's removal of titles with Black and LGBTQ characters may have created a hostile environment for students, potentially violating their civil rights. The Education Department's Office for Civil Rights released its findings in a letter on Friday, wrapping up its investigation into Forsyth County Schools' 2022 decision to pull nearly a dozen books from shelves after parents complained of titles, sexual, and LGBTQ content. To resolve the investigation, the district north of Atlanta agreed to offer supportive measures to students affected by the book removals and to administer a school climate survey per the letter. Forsyth School spokeswoman Jennifer Caracciolo wrote in a statement yesterday on Monday that the district's implementation of the Education Department's recommendations will further our mission to provide an unparalleled education for all to succeed. Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Catherine E. Lehman said in a statement she is pleased that Forsyth County Schools is taking appropriate action regarding acts of harassment. The outcome in the Georgia case could affect how administrators in other districts and states manage book removal requests. It comes as the country faces a historic rise in attempts to pull books from school libraries and classrooms. The majority of such challenges, which began to spike shortly after the coronavirus pandemic ignited culture wars in education, target books that deal with race, racism, and LGBTQ characters and themes. The American Library Association and free expression advocacy group PEN America have repeatedly found. The Education Department's Office for Civil Rights is separately investigating a Texas school district for yanking books with LGBTQ content last year. The outcome of that case, based on a complaint filed by the Texas chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, will determine the validity of the ACLU's novel legal argument that not representing students in school books can constitute discrimination. If the Biden administration finds in the ACLU's favor, it could force districts nationwide to stock more titles featuring LGBTQ characters. The Georgia ruling, although less far-reaching in its implications, is a quiet shot over the bow against school districts that egregiously and without due process remove books from library shelves, said Bruce Fuller, who studies education policy at the University of California at Berkeley School of Education. When students are struggling with these issues of identity and you ban books that are speaking to these kids, that does appear to violate the spirit of the letter of the civil rights law. The Education Department's investigation into the Forsyth District, which involved the examination of school documents, interviews with top school personnel, and a review of public board meeting records, was based on a complaint alleging that the January 2022 removal of books created a racially and sexually hostile environment for students. According to the department, it remains unclear who filed the complaint and when. Caracciolo, the Forsyth spokeswoman, said she did not know the timing of the complaint, but the district was first contacted by the Education Department in March. Before the book removals, Forsyth parents had complained about school library titles they deemed inappropriate because of sexually explicit content, according to the department's letter. Some parents also complained about books with LGBTQ subject matter and asked the district to shelve those books separately in libraries and place tags on those titles per the letter. The district ultimately removed 8 books indefinitely and 2 temporarily, according to the Education Department's letter, and it limited 4 titles to high schools. Superintendent Jeff Bearden told the school board that the books being yanked were obviously sexually explicit or pornographic, according to the Education Department. Of the books listed for removal, 3 center on characters of color and 1 on an LGBTQ protagonist. One of the nixed titles that were obviously sexually explicit or pornographic, according to Superintendent Bearden, is The Bluest Eye by Nobel Prize-winning author Toni Morrison. The Forsyth County News reported, and school district spokeswoman Caracciolo confirmed. Associated Press staff bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek is asking a state legislative panel for changes to a Senate bill that would address a constitutional crisis that has left thousands of people accused of crimes without attorneys. Kotek's letter comes after lawmakers and policy experts have spent over the past year crafting the legislation. Some public defense leaders say Kotek's request for the changes would force them to oppose a bill they otherwise support. Senate Bill 337 would fundamentally change how Oregon provides lawyers to people who cannot afford them. It would create a system with public defenders who are state employees, and it would eventually end the use of contracted for-profit defense firms. One of the provisions would move the Office of Public Defense Services, the state agency responsible for public defense. The bill moves the office out of the Judiciary Department, where legal experts say must be done to keep public defense independent of the courts. And the bill now says public defense would move to the executive branch, but would not allow one person or entity to hire and fire the people in charge of the state's public defense agency. Kotek is against the move, saying if the office is in the executive branch, the governor must have the authority to hire and fire the agency's head and to remove its commissioners to achieve true accountability. Based on her letter, Representative Paul Evans, a Democrat from Monmouth, drafted amendments that lawmakers are planning to discuss in committee today. We've been talking about it for far too long, and we need to have structural systemic change, Evans told Oregon Public Broadcasting. However, Kotek's request goes against national recommendations, as well as a 2019 report she took credit for getting funded, which listed structural changes necessary to make the public defense system independent of both judges and politicians. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There are several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, and most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
With defamation much in the news, we ask, what exactly is defamation? I'm Bill Newman, and this Civil Liberties Minute is a primer on defamation. The first element of a typical defamation claim, private person versus private person, is that the defendant made a false statement of fact. Second, that false assertion of fact must be communicated or published to other person or persons. Third, the plaintiff, the person claiming to have been defamed, generally must prove that the false statement caused them harm, a lost job, for example, and damage to their reputation in the community where they work or live. A defamatory statement about persons who are not public figures can be made negligently or intentionally. We'll discuss public figures and the First Amendment in another Civil Liberties Minute. A few more facts. Defamation that is written is called libel. Think newspapers, books, or magazines. Defamation that is verbal is called slander. Think radio. Because defamation is a civil action, the standard of proof is a preponderance of the evidence, 50% plus a feather. A plaintiff can win money damages. No one goes to jail. Opinions are not defamatory. They're opinions, unless they embed untrue statements of fact. A defense to defamation is truth. You can say terrible things about another person, and if what you said is true, it's not defamatory. Because in the world of defamation, falsity is the currency of the realm. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because understanding the law can matter, and freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2003. That was the day that the U.S. Senate approved more than $300 billion in tax cuts over the next decade. The cuts barely passed. Vice President Dick Cheney cast the deciding vote 51-50. Starting in 2001, President George W. Bush proposed and pushed for a series of drastic tax cuts. The administration promised the changes would help to create jobs and grow the economy, but the results fell far short of that goal. 10 years after the massive tax cuts, the Washington Post ran a story analyzing their impact. The article stated, quote, "By any measure, the Bush tax cuts have benefited the wealthy more than the middle class. The top 20% of earners received 73% of the tax relief. The bottom 20% only received 1%. Coupled with spending on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the tax cuts sent the national debt soaring. And those promised jobs, they never materialized. 2001 to 2007 marked the worst period of job growth since the 1950s. Then, in 2008, the recession wiped out 8 million jobs. Many of the Bush tax cuts were designed to sunset or expire after so many years. Yet, when it came time for the cuts to end in 2010, Republicans in Congress fought to keep them going. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka declared, "It is absolutely insane that in these tough economic times, some people want to continue George W. Bush's tax giveaways to millionaires. Working families are losing their jobs, their benefits, and their homes. They are the ones who need help." The Bush tax cuts finally expired in 2013, although new legislation repackaged and continued many of them. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 55 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high around 73 to 75 with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. A few passing clouds overnight, otherwise generally clear with lows in the upper 40s. Winds out of the northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. And then partly cloudy skies tomorrow with highs in the upper 70s. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is the pollen of note here, and it's rated very high in the little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 20 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so you know to take care. Slather on the SPF max. Barometric pressure is currently holding steady, but expected to fall. It's currently at 30.09 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is up to 78%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 65 degrees and mostly cloudy. Rome is 75 with rain. Kyiv is 75 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 60 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 78 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 58 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 45 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay for heavy fog. And New York, New York is 67 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Bassim Mourou of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Lebanon's public prosecutor summoned the country's embattled central bank governor yesterday for questioning following an international arrest warrant issued against him in France over corruption charges. Raed Salameh is to answer the summons later this week, although no specific date was given. France, Germany, and Luxembourg are investigating Salameh and his associates over a myriad of alleged financial crimes, including illicit enrichment and laundering of $330 million. A French investigative judge on May 16th issued an international arrest warrant, or otherwise known as an Interpol Red Notice, for the 72-year-old Salameh after he failed to show up in Paris for questioning. Officials in Beirut said that public prosecutor Ghassan Ouidat will formally ask France to hand over the governor's case files to decide on future measures against Salameh. Asked whether it is possible to hand the former governor over to France, the official said Lebanon does not hand its citizens to foreign countries and the case will be overseen in Lebanon. They added that once Ouidat receives the case files from France, he will decide whether Salameh should face justice in Lebanon or elsewhere.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Rod McGurk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Prominent Australian Indigenous journalist Stan Grant quit television hosting duties yesterday, Monday, in response to online racist abuse over his comments during King Charles III's coronation about historic Aboriginal dispossession. Grant, a member of the Wirrawadji Juri tribe of Indigenous Australians, I'm sorry for that mispronunciation, and former international correspondent for U.S.-based CNN, said at the end of Australian Broadcasting Corp's weekly national panel discussion Q&A that he was stepping away for a little while because his soul was hurting. To those who have abused me and my family, I would just say, if your aim was to hurt me, well, you've succeeded, Grant said. I'm sorry that I must have given you so much cause to hate me so much, to target me and my family, to make threats against me. Grant has been under fire since taking part in a panel discussion on the ABC ahead of the May 6th coronation ceremony in London. Topics included a push to have a president replace the British monarch as Australia's head of state and Indigenous suffering from colonization. Critics claimed that the ABC had soured the celebratory mood of the coronation. His supporters say inaccurate and inflammatory reporting of his views in mainstream media has fueled racially abusive and threatening personal attacks on social media, wearing the news veteran down. After more than 30 years of news experience in Australian television, Grant wrote on Friday in his regular ABC online column that Monday would be the last time in the foreseeable future that he would host Q&A because of the news media and social media abuse. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.